Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Robert Diggs, and I am the Community and Partnerships Lead for RSA US. On behalf of Aisha and Ian from Wasafiri, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this RSA US Skillshare Systemcraft in Action, Mitigating Young Kenyans' Exposure to Extremism. Before we get started, I'd like to give a little background on the RSA, RSA US, and cover some ground rules about today's event. Founded in the UK, RSA stands for the Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce. It has been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. Today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven think tank, committed to providing an independent platform for research and debate on contemporary issues and topics. Of the 30,000 fellows spread out around the world, about 1,000 live and work here in the United States, including Ian. RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the United States with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. Future of work, universal basic income, and creativity and education are just a few of the areas we hope to impact. Before I introduce our speakers and briefly highlight today's schedule, I'd like to cover some ground rules about today's event. You'll see on the slide the meeting notes. As I noted, we are recording this event and it is being broadcast to YouTube, mostly for the benefit of folks who are in the waiting room as they wait for me to get through these intro notes. But you're free to use the chat to raise any questions or points of clarification. We do come from very different backgrounds, cultures, and countries this morning, this afternoon, or evening. And in the interest of making sure we all know where we're coming from, if you take a moment to rename yourself to include your country or city or country where you're calling in from, we would greatly appreciate that. However, I do ask that you be respectful. Use language that your mother or mom would approve of. I do not hesitate to remove people from our meetings for lack of decorum, but thankfully I haven't had to do that yet. Once we get to the open Q&A portion, you will be able to speak. There's a hand raising function that we will use. I will explain that a little bit later once we get to that portion of the event. Now to our speakers. Aisha Adan and Ian Randall FRSA both work for a B Corp consultancy called Wasafiri. In fact, Ian is a founding director. Their work focuses on systems level approaches to tackling diverse and complex issues. Today, Ian will lead off with an introduction to Systemcraft, a framework they have developed over the course of their many years of work in the field. Afterwards, Aisha, an expert on engaging communities to reduce the risk of young people turning to extremism, will share the reality of applying Systemcraft in practice. So Ian, tell us about Systemcraft and the key concepts that undergird the framework.
Hey, thanks, Diggs. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, so Systemcraft. Well, you know, Wasafiri, we're a consultancy, an institute, and a kind of incubator that's been working on all sorts of complex issues since we got founded about 10 years ago. And most of those have been African oriented, but increasingly globally now. And everything from climate change to violent extremism to just started some work actually on that Scott's on the call on social exclusion and schools in the UK. So really a very wide range. Most of my work's been about food security and agriculture and continues to be so. But a few years ago, we said, well, we've been working in all these spaces, asking how you deliver change on some of these really intractable problems. And what have we learned about that? And we sat down and we knew there's been a lot, there's a lot of research that we tap into about systems theory and complexity, but we found that quite impractical. And people that we work with were constantly asking, what do I do next? What's the next thing I need to do to make change happen? People at the front lines of making change happen. So Systemcraft was designed to try and make sort of unlock system change in practice for people that want to have an impact at scale and take that big point of view. And we really kind of reverse engineered from our experience of working in all these spaces. So that's where it came from. And yeah, looking forward to I will go through now very quickly and try and share some of the key principles of that. So give you a fly past. Mostly though, that tends to end up being a bit high level, and we find people find it most interesting and useful and prompts new ways of thinking when we share how it works in practice for us and the way it unlocks our thinking. So we're going to do a deep dive by sort of applying it in real time through Aisha and her work, her really amazing work, kind of working with kind of reduce the radicalisation of young people around extremism in Kenya and East Africa. So first of all, though, my job is to do a quick high-level run-through of Systemcraft, some of the ideas that underpin it. So Biggs, if you just click onto the next slide there, the world is certainly full of complex problems, whether that is homelessness, climate change, smallholder poverty, or trying to make sure our organizations are as diverse as they deserve to be. And it often feels intractable. It can end up feeling, you know, sort of hopeless and despairing as you look at these issues that just persist despite our best efforts. What we found is that actually the issues are kind of symptoms. They are outputs of systems that hold them in place. There are broader networks and relationships and mindsets and power structures. And unless we actually tackle these kind of underlying systems, we will keep getting the same systems. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to actually pull out a metaphor because sometimes this is helpful to use a metaphor. I'm a gardener. And if you think about trying to grow some vegetables, so like this tomato, you may well find that some of your vegetables aren't doing what you want them to. Now, I can focus on that particular tomato, but I will be far more successful if I worry about the enabling conditions. So if I think about enough sunlight, have I got a big tree that's blocking my garden where I'm growing my vegetables? Do I have good quality soil? Do I have the right companion plants where the pollinators are coming? What are the things around? And there's a little, you go to the next slide. There we go. So, you know, if we focus on the enabling conditions, we actually end up getting a different outcome. And sometimes system thinkers will say, you know, it's a bit like wanting your tomatoes to go and just shouting at them to grow and grow healthy, when actually, you know, it might make you feel a bit better that you're doing something noisy, but you're not going to really create the broader enabling conditions to get the outcomes that you're aspiring to. So that's the work of Systemcraft, is to go, well, how do we create these enabling conditions in the face of a complex problem? Next slide. Oh, actually, if you just click through on it, there you go. So we say there are 4 common characteristics of a complex problem. And the work initially is to kind of recognize the complexity that creates and unpack that. So, and unless you acknowledge that complexity, you are likely to potentially even make the problem worse. So the first thing is there's never a single owner of a problem. It doesn't matter kind of how powerful or clever or wealthy kind of stakeholder is, they can't change that on their own. The only form of action is collective action to work on a complex issue. Secondly, there's no single root cause. There will be a whole set of dynamics that are producing the issue and that hold it in place, which means it's immune to silver bullets. And you know, it means you've got to ask all sorts of different points of view to understand all the things that feed in to that problem and hold it in place, and constantly ask kind of what else, what's beneath this, what's driving it. Thirdly, there is constant evolution. The issue is dynamic and you have to work within a dynamic way. You know, the change that might be possible today won't be possible tomorrow. So you constantly be looking for windows of opportunity as something's moving that allows you to actually steer this change in some way and have agency over it. And lastly, and often this is a hard idea to get your head around, but the one that when you ask this question unlocks things for people, is often the system, well, the system is nearly always, it is working at some level. It's working for some people some of the time. Climate change is an easy way of explaining this that we can all relate to, is that I don't want climate change to happen, but I do want to turn my heating on and drive my kids to school. So there are ways in which there's a set of things that are holding it in place that are working for us. It is producing outcomes that we want, as well as the outcomes that we don't. And unless, if we simply think the system is broken, we are blind to the power that is in that system. So we must ask, who or what is this system working for? So the work here initially is to kind of recognize that complexity and do that collectively, because you can't possibly hold this all together in your own head and from your own view. And secondly, to recognize this kind of work, to be kind of tracking that complexity, needs to be done updated, because as things are changing. So that's all very well to kind of recognize the complexity, but the next slide is to unpack. And again, if you just click through there, there are 5 dimensions that we find help answer, what should I actually do next? Where are these enabling conditions that I can work on? And they're all important. They are not sequential. The first one is, how well organized are we for collaboration? Do we have the kind of architecture in place to bring the actors together that are going to need to work on this? Secondly, have we set the direction? Is it clear where we're going? Have we got some concrete things that are going to pull us forwards amidst the ambiguity? Thirdly, have we made it matter? Like, there's going to be, whatever change is required, there's going to be some loss is inevitable to some people. And it's going to be really important to make people want what's over the horizon. So if we've got a kind of critical mass of people who are pulling in that direction, are excited about that future. Fourthly, change will only fundamentally happen, the kind of tipping point that you might want to reach, once you change the incentives that are in that system. Every day we all make choices, and it's all very well for some of us to be trying to make personal choices, but until it becomes a default for everybody, the default choice, the system will not change. So how do you get to the point where those incentives tip? And whether that's through formal or informal mechanisms, whether it's things like taxes, or whether it's in terms of what people say they value and our cultural norms. And then lastly, harnessing collective intelligence. So none of us understand the whole system. A lot of the systems that are problematic are the ones that work for the few and not the many. And that is because some voices end up being stronger and kind of exert their needs over that system. And that is often because some parties have more access to information about how the system's working, which puts them in a greater level of control. So if you can address some of those asymmetries by opening up the information flows, that can redress those imbalances. So we find those really 5 kind of dimensions to kind of dive into and exploring a complex problem. And at the end of it, we say, well, what next? What should we actually do? And kind of unlocks those things. But all sounds very well in theory, but it's now time to see if we can apply it to a real world, definitely complex issue. And so I'm really pleased to have my colleague Aisha, who is working on the issue of violent extremism in East Africa. And first of all, Aisha, before we get into this, maybe you just give us a little kind of 2 minutes on who you are, where you are, and what is, what are the headlines of the issue that you work on.
Thank you, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm calling in from Kenya, down the coast, Mombasa, to be precise. So my top headlines for youth radicalization and extremism will be to just explain that young people make up the largest demographic in Africa. And they face a lot of challenges. And most of these challenges range from social, political, cultural, and economic challenges that makes them or predisposes them to turn to violent extremism. So violent extremists have taken advantage of these gaps and loops that exist within systems, and manage to have young people pursue their cause. And this means turning to violent extremism. On the flip side, I would say, despite these challenges, young people present a great opportunity for to be part of the solution to these problems, if given these spaces and opportunities.
Yeah.
To also conclude is to note that violent extremism is not the only violent conflict that young people are exposed to, but also other social dangers and violent conflicts, including human trafficking, drug abuse, and also criminal gang activities. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, it's clearly compelling, both opportunity to unlock this next generation's potential, but also the kind of depths of some of the things that are hard about that. So we're going to firstly unpack some of that complexity by asking you to explore those 4 characteristics. And the first one is to recognize there's no single actor that can suddenly address this, but who are the actors? What are the stakeholders that are around this issue that need to come together if we're going to reduce the likelihood of radicalization? Who needs to be in the mix of making change happen?
Yeah. So owing to the sensitivity and nature of violent extremism, it's important to note that there are multiple actors. And now that we've mentioned that there's no single owner to this problem. So multiple actors are working hard to try and address violent extremism in different ways. So some of these actors include both state actors, non-state actors who are really working on prevention and countering violent extremism work. We have business community, we have the community groups themselves, not forgetting the young people. So people are working around the clock to try and ensure that they're addressing violent extremism both in preventing and also countering violent extremism. So these are multiple actors. And I think in terms of working together, and because of the complexity of this issue, there's need for collective action because it affects everyone, but affects everyone differently. So there's need for collective action when addressing violent extremism among these multiple actors.
Thank you. The second question to unpack that complexity is to say, well, there's clearly no single cause. There's one thing you could point to that would say, well, if we sort that out, then we've solved the issue. What would you say are at least some of the kind of the mix of different drivers that are causing the radicalization of young people?
Again, to mention the fact that violent extremism is a complex issue, there are multiple root causes. There's no definite or single root cause that makes young people turn to violent extremism. So I'll clump these drivers to macro structural issues that range from lack of unemployment, job opportunities for young people, unresolved historical injustices that also are carried forward to different generations. These include issues of land, issues of opportunities in education system, in terms of young people accessing different opportunities. Not forgetting human rights abuses and the fact that there are a lot of concerns around structural issues around what is working and what's not working. Again, talking about macro, we should be, some of the drivers also that affect young people during violent extremism, main cause also are more personalized concerns and issues and drivers. And these include issues of looking for sense of belonging. Young people are looking for identity. They're looking for sense of belonging. They lack that support system within their networks, within their neighborhoods. And that's why they opt to join groups that are willing to offer that opportunity to them. So there are more personalized issues that needs urgent attention, and there are those that are the macro level that involve higher level actions, including issues on policy changes and issues on how to connect different groups and policy actors. But also most difficult is working with more personalized and individual grievances that are so much tied to an individual and a family network. That makes it even more complicated because now interventions to address violent extremism must also be in line with some of these individual grievances that is almost difficult to achieve.
Gosh, I can see sometimes we talk about kind of fractals or different levels where you've got dynamics playing out from the personal through to the global and at every level in between that are kind of creating this intense soup that is swirling around and holding something in place, and I can hear that. Which is actually also the next question, say what's dynamic, what's changing here, what's changing about the nature of this issue at the moment. You know, and some of that is about recognizing the way it might be getting harder, but also where there might be windows of opportunity that are opening up for positive change as well that you could kind of lean into. But what do you see as some of the things that are going on in Kenya at the moment that are kind of dynamic about this issue?
So it's evolving because of changes in context, and different contexts present different issues that also makes young people susceptible or vulnerable to join violent extremist groups. And these include issues around grievances around, for example, issues that affect young people in terms of political leadership, structural issues that continuously change. Again, talking about narratives and strategies among recruiters themselves who continuously change their strategies and approaches. And that's why they take advantage of some of these situations that happen on the ground. So their strategies continue to change. And again, noting on global narratives that play out locally. So global narratives include issues with, for example, the cartoon in France that also have a ripple effect locally. Talk about the Rohingya Muslims, talk about global issues such as the pandemic itself. COVID-19 has also presented opportunity for young people getting lured to join violent extremism because of COVID-19, there are restrictions that have been placed by the government. For example, closure, shutdown of religious spaces and all that. This comes down to lack of oppression among specific community groups, that this is infringement to freedom of worship and different rights that are supposed to be given to different groups. So it's changing locally, and also some other geopolitical factors that also affect.
Goodness. Okay. Yeah, I can see there's a lot going on there. And then it's funny, we've obviously talked about this before. It's funny, the question of who is this working for? At some point seems a hard question to ask when you think about extremism, but at the same time, actually, I sometimes hear when you start telling very personal experiences of, you know, the people's stories, you begin to hear the ways actually somehow the system is working. You know, there are things that it does do that works for people. So do you want to share some of the sense of how the system is working, even if at some level it's generating this outcome of violent extremism that clearly seems negative at the end, but what is it that's working here?
Yeah, so the system is working because I will say that the government is providing opportunities for young people. For example, in Kenya, young people are able to access 30% of procurement opportunities. Young people have been categorized as special groups, include with women. The opportunities for young people to participate or engage in skills-based program, and for young people to also join different government programs as well. That's in essence should be an ideal functioning system, which is, and for some reasons it's not working because of some of the concerns that young people have, including, like, for example, do young people have access to this information? Do young people know the existence of these opportunities? How much are they engaged? Do people come together with young people to discuss if it's working or not working? Are they placed in better positions to be able to make the drastic decisions around what's not working for young people or not? So in an ideal situation, such systems function, but again, such loopholes exist, and that's why extremists will take advantage of those weaknesses and come in to provide where the government has failed, for example, or whether different actors have tried to help in terms of addressing these complex issues. So that's it. But I think in terms of violent extremist organizations coming in to to come in and try and take over what's not working is something that needs a lot of attention, because a system can work if, again, there's collective action and people work on what is missing or what is the gap between some of these functioning systems.
And what I hear in that is that young people have a real need for a sense of power and belonging and some level of income, and at the moment, those things aren't being provided by the system you would like, but instead, actually, the kind of those radical groups are meeting that need. At some level, they are able to meet that need and give those young people that sense of belonging and purpose and identity. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Taking advantage of the weaknesses in a functioning system is what violent extremists will capitalize on.
So, you'll have heard in that conversation ways in which we can use those questions to kind of unpack an issue, recognize its complexity, and at this point, it can be quite overwhelming. I'd also say you can do this like we have in a kind of 10-minute brainstorm, or you can spend years and years and do it enormously thoroughly, like the ICCC report on climate change. Probably it's ICC, isn't it? Panel on climate change that came out, comes out every COP26 about looking at all the science and what's going on. You can do this huge project, so it's as large or as small as you need it to be. But always it's important to bring different views and perspectives in, because nobody can see the whole system and the whole issue. So recognize it. So that first work of kind of unpacking the complexity of the landscape is really important. The next step, though, is to say, okay, well, what do we need to do next? What are we going to do about this? And what are the enabling conditions that might unlock something? So let's dive into that. And again, I want to enforce this is not a linear process, and we often find that one of these dimensions is more salient at any one particular time. So we're actually going to get these in a different order the way I introduced them earlier. And the first one is, can I ask you, in terms of harnessing collective intelligence, how well can we plug in to kind of understand what's going on at the moment, and not just for the sake of sort of extracting that information, but actually to start giving the people at the heart of these issues a better understanding themselves of what's going on, because ultimately the change needs to be led by the people who are living that, in the middle of that reality. So how do you improve the quality of the kind of collective intelligence about what's going on to unlock change?
Well, most research that goes out, of course, very important, is helping in terms of building our knowledge gap around violent extremism, which is very important and critical. But again, working on harnessing collective intelligence, building shared understanding is from our work, drawing from the work that we do, is making young people themselves be producers of this knowledge, because it affects them the most. And again, as producers of knowledge, they get to understand and dig deeper on what's happening within their surroundings, try to identify some of the root causes, including those micro-personal situations and structural issues I talked about. But again, become the consumers of this knowledge. So once they produce this by giving us a common understanding on what's working and what's not working, and how this complex issue is evolving, because it affects them and they are connected to such issues. I mean, they know what is happening within their neighborhood. So they'll be better placed to explain some of these changes and build our common knowledge or our understanding around violent extremism. But again, as consumers of this knowledge, they'll be able to be part of the solution, to try and come up with a concrete solution on how to solve this issue. Of course, connecting other young people to these solutions and different approaches. So it's a matter of how do we engage young people to try and bring out that information that we are really looking out, not becoming too extractive, but also have them participate in this knowledge creation, but also be consumers of this knowledge.
It's quite powerful, actually, when I think about, if they're the producers of the knowledge about the issue, they both get the understanding, but the act itself is an act of empowerment that disrupts some of the patterns that are problematic. So secondly, in terms of making it matter, actually, how how do you ensure that there is a vision for something better, that enough people are excited about coming together to make change happen and working together? What's the way you build a new narrative that's compelling, that people can get behind in those communities?
So how we make it matter is from our work is to recognize the great efforts young people have, especially the most vulnerable. So remember, I talked about them lacking that sense of belonging and identity. So how do you make it matter? For us is we placing this young person at the core of understanding the problem, but also be part of the solution. So young people are looking for identity. So from this process, from our work, trying to make young people give that recognition that young people can be part of the solution. So placing this young person there to try and develop those solutions. So instead of what is normally known that young people cause violence, young people are engaged in different activities, social ills and all that, young people can be agents of change once they're given that opportunity that they are responsible. And again, from all this process, we've tried to create ownership to the different strategies and approaches that we've engaged young people with. So with ownership comes responsibility, and with the responsibility, we envision and we get the changes that we desire within the communities among these young people.
Okay, so I can imagine actually you're almost beginning to change both their understanding of themselves, but also a different narrative about not viewing young people as a threat, something to be afraid of, but actually a sense of this next generation is kind of a boundless opportunity and talent and potential. And, whether you're then from the security forces or the government or wherever else, you're suddenly viewing these young people in a different frame because of the way they're turning up here. The next one to get into is actually to change the incentives. And I can imagine this is really hard when actually some of the incentives for these young people to get radicalized and pulled in that direction are pretty compelling in the face of what other opportunities are around them. So how do you think about, what are the incentives at the moment and what needs to change about that?
So when you talk about young people getting lured to join violent extremism or getting to be radicalized, they're looking for alternative opportunities. And when we talk about changing incentives, is what is there in that environment that needs to be changed? How do we offer alternative opportunities to these young people? So when you talk about young people lacking connection, for example, to local community structures, including local peace and conflict resolution structures, they have nowhere to turn to. So they have frustrations on where they can share. They lack systems and support systems and channels where they can share their frustrations to. So if it's issues around relationships, issues around connecting young people to different actors on the ground, try and help them. So from the work that we do is trying to transform young people's opportunities in terms of, if looking at young people's, for example, their social hangout joints where they get a lot of negative peer influence. How do we work around converting or transforming negative peer influence to positive peer influence or peer support? So transforming negative peer influence to positive peer support among young people, because young people tend to listen to their own. So providing that space that young people have a platform to also engage one-on-one among themselves, but also among different actors. You're offering an alternative. So for us, connecting young people, building relationships among young people, expanding their networks outside their own scope, where they just feel like this is where I get a lot of frustrations and all that. So increasing their position within their community. If it's about trust issue, how do you continue to build that trust between these young people and the different local actors that are present? So working around those offers an alternative opportunity for this young person to also come back and reflect and then become responsible and also be able to change what's not working within their neighborhoods.
That's company. I can see how in a way it would be easy to say, oh, there's young people turning up at this local gathering place. Let's shut that down. But instead to recognize they're turning up because there's something that they're pulled towards, and actually the opportunities to kind of redirect that energy in a positive direction to change the incentives where that pulls them, that they're you're not going to change that they're seeking something, but what is it that actually provides the reward that they're looking for? Next thing, in terms of setting the direction, this is actually about how you begin to set some goals here that people can all get bought into, a sense of vision about where they're going and pulling people together behind that. And I can imagine that is immensely difficult in such a charged and, at times dangerous context. So what does it look like? What does it look like? What might be some of the ways in which people could pull together behind what feels like an emergent vision that you're portraying of some things that are changing? How would you get people behind some goals for that?
So working with the most vulnerable youth locally, it's always not easy to have them conform or get to a clear direction on what they want in their lives or achieve their goals, or how they can achieve their goals. So from the experience that we have and drawing from our work, it's always easier to work with young people informally and then move to more formalized processes. So because they tend to shy away from formal processes and therefore would opt not to participate, for example, in community programs or say some of the work that is out there to address violent extremism. So the less structured approaches and strategies, the more engagement from young people and the more ownership, like I said, in terms of addressing violent extremism. So beginning with less structure, then moving to more structured ways. From our work, we've supported and facilitated young people to always work with short-term goals and then look into longer-term goals. So because young people always want quick fixes. They just want, like, I want this and then I have to go with this. I have no time. So they're very impatient. But again, working with them to determine short-term realistic goals that will end up having them vision or have a vision of what they need to do on a long-term basis. So you go with their pace. I think that's from the work that we've done. You go with their pace and starting off from less structure to more structured ways of working, and also trying to work on short-term realistic goals, then move to longer-term goals. And that's also part of their dreams anyway. So helping young people formulate their dreams and vision and how they can put that down to practice and how they can be realistic about their dreams and how they can achieve it both at short-term and also in long-term basis.
So I can see, there's a lot of work with the young people themselves, but actually it's going to take a lot of different actors to come around providing that support and, reframing the narrative around young people, changing some of the ways that, whether that is the police or employers or different youth programs, they all kind of coming around that. You've got everything being set from the kind of very local level, at family level almost, through to national level policy. What would it look like to actually how on earth do you organize that when some of those stakeholders are quite disconnected from each other and have very different language and frames and interests? What are the ways you can actually get people organized to kind of drive these changes and steer young people in a different direction?
Yeah, working with the most vulnerable young people down here is always not easy to have them connect with different actors, for example, the state actors in one platform. As in the beginning, it's always difficult. So talk about organizing for collaboration. It's always difficult in the beginning to have everyone, including young people, on one table. But again, having separate discussions or platforms for different actors really helps because of the various interests that exist among different actors, again, will help young people to also formulate their own ways of looking or of working with these different actors. So again, from our work through research and community engagement, we've been able to facilitate different actors who are working on prevention and countering violent extremism to try and identify and understand opportunities that they will be able to engage the young people with. So again, facilitating that process to identify opportunities and on how they can understand and engage young people. So while I'm saying that it's not easy to have young people connect in the beginning with different actors, but I would say strongly that it's possible for young people to share platforms with different actors if they're given their own space to be able to share and air their own grievances and be able to relate and connect. So trust is key, and trust is only developed if they're given those platforms for collaboration.
Well, thank you. I can see, whenever I hear about this work from the folks at Wasafiri that are working on violent extremism and conflict, it's clearly much harder to get this kind of this element in place than it is. You know, my work is all on agriculture, and obviously farmers want to talk to governments, to companies, to, you know, bring those folks together to make a value chain work is clearly a lot less of a loaded conversation than the kind of work you're having to do. Having gone through those 5 dimensions, you know, we do this kind of periodically, and we come back, and every time it kind of, I think, stretches us to think about, oh, well, what next? Are there some things that, you know, having gone through this, and you and I have done this a couple of times in preparation, but what is it that's now at the front of your head going, this is what I need to push into next? This is the kind of horizon line that I'm looking at and saying, I actually need to prioritize this, creating this enabling condition to unlock change. What, having done that, becomes your new priority?
I think what next for me will be just a call for different actors to work together, not forgetting the vital role and contribution young people have in terms of transforming some of these challenges that we have to opportunities. So how do we strengthen that collaboration between different actors? And these, I mean, state and non-state actors, to come together and trying to understand the young people better, and also to try and see how they can support young people transform some of the challenges to opportunities that exist among their communities. But again, most importantly is, as we talked about violent extremism being dynamic and evolving, let's also try and see how we can adapt our responses, our interventions, and how we can be flexible in our approaches in trying to adapt to changing context and dynamics.
Well, thank you. Whenever I listen to you, I'm struck by the contrast between the narrative I get from afar about violent extremism and the humanity of the way you talk about it and the individuals' lives, and how, in, you know, the first victims of sort of violent extremism are the young people at the heart of it. And actually, this is all about kind of changing all the incentives around them and giving them pathways to be their best selves in some way. So thank you for that work. And yeah, and so for everybody else, hopefully you've begun to see in this the way that Systemcraft, you know, we're using it to try and figure out actually what's, as part of a kind of long-term effort in addressing an issue, recognizing this is a journey. Some of you were here when I explained that Wasafiri means travelers, and we see all this is about a journey of change and working together into the unknown. That, you know, it's really about going on that journey together and asking questions that recognize the complexity, but seek to say, what's the next thing we can change to create that enabling condition and steer this issue in a different direction. So I'll stop there and hand over to Robert and to field some questions. And we're wide open as to whether those questions are because you are system change enthusiasts and want to hear about Systemcraft more, or whether it's because you are really curious about the very compelling experience and insights that Aisha has on the front lines of working with radicalisation of young people. So either is fine.
Yes, so thank you for that. I'm going to stay off camera. You can see me in the top of your speaker view if you're viewing it on a computer. I know that there's a question from Lynn, but quickly, if you wish to be unmuted to ask your own question, you simply go to the participant tab, click more, and then click raise your hand. If you're not on video, then you will sort of appear as an ephemeral voice, as I am right now. But without further ado, let me give Lynn the ability to unmute herself, and I will ask you to join us to ask your question.
Okay, thanks for that. And sorry, I think I probably clicked raise your hand about 10 times, and I was like the kid in the classroom that goes me, 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 because I wasn't seeing any message that had gone through until I saw your message. So thank you. Aisha, thank you so much for the work you're doing and for this, for answering all of those questions. I am interested in what you're doing around gender, where women are involved, both as mothers and grandmothers, who, as we all know, often are the ones trying to raise the kids in poverty and in various developing situations. Also, whether when you talk about young people do this and young people do that, how many of those are girls? How many young girls are involved at that level? And then I have other questions, but I'll leave it there for now and let other people jump in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. So on your first question about gender, we've done so much work around, first of all, research work in terms of, well, understanding what the contribution or the role women play in violent extremism. And of course, we understand from the knowledge and from what we are gathering is that women are perpetrators of violence. Women are also involved in terms of to play different roles in terms of sympathizers. Women are also used as a way to, for example, engage or recruit others as well. But again, most importantly is the role, the positive contribution women play in this context. So women, especially mothers, what we've gathered is that mothers play a critical role and they bear lots of burden in terms of when they lose their sons and their children and relatives to VE, to violent extremism, they become the most depressed and most traumatized. So from the work that we do, from the research that we've done, we've identifying the crucial role women play, and for this case, especially young mothers who have a lot of burden. We've been able to engage them, have a specific program for them in terms of having them to also understand or share their experiences, and also trying to get out, give them that opportunity to be able to share, opportunity for them to be able to transform some of the changes that exist, that they desire in their communities, but also women to be able to support one another. We've seen women or young mothers be able to create support systems among themselves, even by the fact that they're going through lots of traumatic experiences. So we've also supported them in terms of trying to provide psychosocial support for them to also be free and relieve them of their burdens. But also, as I mentioned, that our work mainly is to have young people, and this by young people, I mean both men and women. These are youth, both male and female, have them engaged in terms of becoming agents of change in their communities. So the same challenges that young men face are not similar to young women, but because they live in a shared space, they all face similar challenges. So we have different opportunities and programs that we engage young people, young women on. And it's interesting to note that young women are most responsive while we engage them in addressing violent extremism. And this is largely because of the traumatic experiences and the burden they go through within their family units.
Thank you for that. I see the next question is from Johnny. So Johnny, go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much. This is more of a macro question. I don't know much about Kenyan economy or anything, but I'm just wondering how much of this is to do with top-down neoliberal structures being imposed, via government, by super government institutions, and how it's causing that kind of stuff that results in individualization and responsibilitization, and even in the West, that's causing problems where there's quite a strong formal economy, lots of tax money, and a good social base. But is this what's resulting in the gaps that you speak of, which are some of the contributory factors to what's making the young people attracted to extremism?
Yeah, pretty much, because some of these economic challenges also hit hard young people. and some measures that are taken to address some of these economic challenges also affects young people largely. The good thing is the government has also been able to adjust its approaches in terms of, for example, talking about COVID-19. We had the government support young people with cash transfer programs, where young people could also be supported. But again, there are people who are also supporting in terms of relief food for people who are suffering and all that. But again, talking about young people making the largest demographic, even in Kenya, it's always difficult for the government to be able to support everyone. And therefore, for young people, like I mentioned, they will always look out. If they're not getting satisfied, then the grievances start. Like, I've not been supported. So the government doesn't want me anyway. So that's why I'm not getting supported. So it becomes a grievance, then it builds to frustrations, and then provides opportunities for someone else to come in and fill that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. So there's a question in the chat that I received. Well, it's two questions, actually. Sorry, I lost the chat. Apologies. So the two questions are, which of the 5 dimensions of change has been most challenging to operationalize? And which partners, when they joined, had a clear, obvious impact or a vision of the impact and direction of the partnership/initiative? Excuse me.
Is that in this context, or are we talking in general?
Let's go with general until I hear, yes, in this context.
In this context, okay. So Aisha, you'll be the one, of the 5 dimensions, which one do you think is actually the hardest to make progress on?
I would say changing incentives, because I talked about offering alternative opportunities. And alternative opportunities would want young people to also connect to some of these opportunities that are present locally. And because these opportunities are also managed and given out by specifics, for example, government departments that offer skills-based program, for example, the institutions that offer different levels of community empowerment programs and all that. So working around having these institutions, these opportunities support the most vulnerable becomes very difficult, because people tend to shy away from the most vulnerable for example, for security reasons. There are a lot of risks involved in that. Then again, they end up getting misplaced and not supported. So, and that's why it becomes also a fertile ground for further recruitment and frustrations.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard from you and the team that often the kind of programs that are there to, in theory, to address violence exclusion tend to end up working with the young people that perhaps are less at risk, because you have access to those young people. So you can run the program, but actually to really reach the folks that are most vulnerable, it's very hard to access them and bring them in to any kind of program or relationship where you can work with them to change those incentives. Biggs, you're on mute.
I realized that I forgot how spotlighting changes my controls. But hearing no more questions or seeing no more questions, I would just like to say thank you to Ian and Aisha for your work that you've done. I want to echo the comment that Anne made in the chat about, especially for you, Aisha, the work you're doing with young people. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. If there are no closing thoughts from either of you, Ian, Aisha,
yeah,
last words?
Anyway, well, thank you for having us, RSA. It's been a bit of a long-term ambition that eventually we shared some thinking on an RSA stage. So thanks for ticking off that long-term ambition. It's fantastic. Also to say, if people are interested, we do have a document we would call our Systemcraft primer. I've just posted a link there. It's at wasafirihub.com/systemcraft, and anybody can download that primer, and hopefully it's a tool for people that are working on complex issues anywhere.
And I will add that you will all get that link in addition to a re-reminder about the pre-event survey, which is still live. You can still submit the questions that you have. The point being now to help you connect with folks from this call that might be able to help you with any systems change approach questions that you may have, including Ian and Aisha, the folks at Wasafiri. So without any further ado, I wish you all a great rest of your mornings, afternoons, and evenings, and hope to see you next time at another RSA event. Thank you all.
Great, thank you.